The dinner table was set with elegance, the soft glow of crystal chandeliers hanging above, casting warm light over the luxurious setting. Yet, despite the opulence of the scene, a chilling tension filled the room. Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire and CEO of one of the most powerful tech empires in the world, sat at the head of the table, his face pale and flushed with discomfort. He had just taken a bite of his wife's meal, the dish she had carefully prepared for him. His hand shook slightly as he set his fork down, a familiar dizziness creeping in. His wife, Isabella, watched him closely, her expression calm, almost too calm. The others at the table, guests from all walks of high society, exchanged puzzled glances. They had seen this happen before. Ethan's sudden bouts of illness, his unexplained fatigue, all after meals prepared by his beloved wife. "Are you feeling all right, darling?" Isabella asked, her voice laced with concern, though her eyes betrayed a subtle, cold glint that went unnoticed by the others. Ethan nodded weakly, his mind foggy. He had always trusted his wife, but lately, something felt wrong. Every time he ate her food, his health deteriorated. He had been to the doctor, undergone countless tests, and yet, no one could find a cause. It had become a cruel mystery that no one had the courage to unravel. The room grew quieter, the guests shifting uneasily in their seats as they waited for the billionaire to respond. Ethan looked at Isabella, then at the sparkling glass of water in front of him, his thoughts scattered. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't pinpoint it. Meanwhile, at the far end of the table, the maid, a young black girl named Maya, quietly watched the scene unfold. She had noticed the patterns, the way Ethan's condition seemed to worsen after every meal, the subtle tension between him and his wife. Maya, though only a servant in this grand household, was sharper than most of the others. She had seen too many things that had been brushed aside. And now, watching Ethan's pale face and his wife's calm demeanor, she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Maya knew that something was wrong, but she couldn't yet prove it. Her heart raced as she glanced at the dish in front of Ethan. Was it the food? Was someone trying to harm him? She couldn't say for sure, but she had to find out. She had no voice in this household, no power to question the people she served, but the fear that gripped her grew stronger with each passing moment. Maya could only watch and wait, knowing that the truth was hidden just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. It was a secret only she had the chance to expose. Ian Caldwell, billionaire and tech mogul, sat back in his chair, his mind clouded by the fog that had settled in after another meal prepared by his wife, Isabella. The dizziness was familiar, the nausea too real. He had just finished the meal, a sumptuous dish that Isabella had been perfecting for weeks, yet here he was again, feeling the same way he had after every dinner for the past month. He glanced at Isabella, sitting across from him, her face an unreadable mask of concern, and his confusion deepened. Something about all of this didn't add up. His body was betraying him, his energy draining with every passing day. He had been to doctor after doctor, all of them offering the same diagnosis: stress, exhaustion, too many late nights, too much work. But it never felt like that. It felt like something darker was at play. Something more deliberate. Yet, whenever he brought it up to Isabella, she would smile and brush it off, assuring him that he just needed rest. But the nagging suspicion in his mind only grew stronger. Maya, the young black maid, watched from the corner of the room. She had been quietly observing Ethan's strange illness for weeks now, taking note of the pattern, his sudden weakness after every meal Isabella prepared. She had tried to bring it up to the other staff, but they all dismissed her concerns. After all, what could a maid possibly know about the inner workings of the Caldwell household? But Maya wasn't blind, and she wasn't about to let this mystery slip away unnoticed. She had been working in this grand estate for years, and she knew the family well. Ethan was a kind, generous man, but Isabella, she was different. Maya had noticed the way Isabella watched her husband, the way she always seemed to have a perfect answer for his every question, and the way she maintained a cool, calculated distance from the rest of the family. Maya had heard the rumors. Whispers about Isabella's coldness, her history of failed marriages, her desire for control. But those were just whispers, and Maya had no proof to back them up. Still, the situation felt wrong. It wasn't just Ethan's strange illnesses that concerned her, it was the way Isabella's behavior seemed so carefully constructed. As Ethan stood up from the dinner table, his movements slow and unsteady, Maya's concern deepened. She watched as he steadied himself, his hand gripping the edge of the table for support. A moment of vulnerability in the midst of his usually confident demeanor. Isabella was right by his side instantly, her hand gently placed on his arm as if to steady him, though her eyes, too, betrayed a faint glimmer of something darker, something hidden. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked, her voice dripping with concern. Ethan nodded, though the pallor of his face told another story. He seemed to be struggling to maintain composure, and Maya couldn't help but wonder if this was all part of a larger plan. Was Isabella purposely trying to make him sick? Her heart raced as she watched the scene unfold. She couldn't say anything, no one would believe her, but she couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Maya knew she needed to act fast, before it was too late. She wasn't sure how, but she knew something had to be done. Later that night, Maya stayed behind after the others had left for the evening, sneaking into the kitchen. Her footsteps were soft on the marble floors as she carefully examined the leftovers from dinner. The scent still lingered in the air, a combination of spices and something else she couldn't quite place. She knew the spices were nothing unusual. Isabella had always been meticulous about her cooking, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She carefully inspected the dishes, looking for anything out of place. That's when she noticed it, a small vial, half hidden behind the sugar jar, containing a clear liquid. It looked almost harmless, but the unease in Maya's chest flared again. She wasn't sure what it was, but it didn't belong. Could this be the cause of Ethan's illness? Could Isabella have been poisoning him slowly, with the perfect disguise of home-cooked meals? Maya didn't know yet, but she had to find out. With trembling hands, she slipped the vial into her apron pocket and quickly left the kitchen. The path ahead of her was uncertain, but one thing was clear, she could no longer stand by and do nothing. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to come together, and Maya was determined to uncover the truth. But time was running out. She had to act quickly, before the unthinkable happened. Ian Caldwell had been feeling worse each day. The persistent nausea, the dizziness that clouded his thoughts, and the sudden weakness in his limbs were now constants in his life. He had tried everything, doctor's appointments, a change in his routine, new medications, but nothing seemed to work. Every night, after his wife, Isabella, prepared a meal for him, he felt like his body was betraying him. It was a vicious cycle that had drained him, physically and mentally. His wife watched him carefully as he slowly sat down on the couch in their lavish living room, her eyes never leaving him, always calculating, always composed. Yet, beneath the facade, Ian could feel the weight of something dark and unresolved pressing down on him. The truth seemed just beyond his grasp, but he couldn't make sense of it. It had to be the food. That was the only thing he could pinpoint. Isabella's meals were different now, more refined, more expensive, but there was something about them that made him feel worse, not better. Maya, the young black maid who had worked in the Caldwell household for years, had been watching all of this from the shadows. She had seen the deterioration in Ian's health, the way his body seemed to weaken after every meal, and her suspicions grew with each passing day. Maya had been careful, not wanting to overstep her place, but after what she had discovered in the kitchen, after finding that vial hidden behind the sugar jar, she could no longer stay silent. Her heart raced as she walked toward the quiet office where Ian was now resting. She had to make him understand. But how could she, a simple maid, expose something as serious as this? She had no proof, only a growing suspicion. Still, Maya knew she couldn't ignore it. That night, after everyone had retired for the evening, she returned to the kitchen, her movements quiet but urgent. She had the vial with her, the one she had found earlier that evening, still tucked safely in her apron pocket. Her fingers trembled as she placed it on the counter. What was this? She didn't know. But she needed answers. She took a deep breath and began searching through the drawers and cabinets, looking for any other clues, any small detail that might shed light on the situation. She knew she was risking everything by investigating on her own, but what choice did she have? She couldn't let Ian suffer anymore. The kitchen was still and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. Maya's eyes landed on the spice rack. Her mind raced back to the meals Isabella had prepared for Ian. It was subtle, but there was a shift in the spices, new ingredients, strange scents that lingered long after the meal was gone. One of them was a rare, potent spice that had been imported from overseas. Maya had seen it before, but she didn't understand its significance. Could it be linked to Ian's illness? She wasn't sure. But the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like the missing piece of the puzzle. Maya grabbed a small jar from the shelf and examined it carefully. It contained the same spice she had seen Isabella use in the meals, the one that made the air feel thicker, heavier. It was harmless on its own, but when combined with the mysterious liquid Maya had found, it could be something else entirely. She had to act quickly. Maya took the vial and poured a small amount into the jar with the spice, watching the liquid dissolve and mix with the powder. She stared at the concoction for a long moment, her mind racing with possibilities. Could this be the source of Ian's illness? Was Isabella poisoning him, little by little, with each meal? Maya's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. This wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just bad cooking. This was intentional. But why? What was Isabella's motive? Maya couldn't answer that yet. She didn't have all the facts, but she knew she had to act fast. She couldn't let Ian fall any further. The next morning, as the household began to stir, Maya moved quietly through the halls, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed to speak to Ian, to warn him, but how could she? She was just a maid, he was a billionaire, a powerful man, and she was nothing more than a servant in his home. But as she glanced at the vial and the spice in her hand, she knew she couldn't let fear hold her back any longer. She had to find a way to reveal the truth, to stop whatever it was that Isabella was doing to him before it was too late. Ian Caldwell sat quietly in his study, his hand resting on the edge of the desk. His mind wandered, clouded by the events of the past few days. The fog in his mind hadn't cleared, and each day seemed to blur into the next. His body had become a battleground, and he was losing. Despite the countless tests, the doctors had failed to find an answer, and he was beginning to lose hope. It was becoming unbearable. The strange sickness, the weakness that followed each meal his wife, Isabella, prepared, it was as though his very soul was being drained. He was growing weaker with each passing day, and it had all started after the dinners. Isabella's smile, as cold and flawless as ever, haunted him. He tried to tell himself it was all in his head, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. Something was wrong. As he stared out the window, the rays of the afternoon sun failed to warm him. His thoughts were interrupted by a quiet knock on the door. Maya, the young black maid, stepped in. Her presence was always subtle, like a shadow, but there was something about the way she carried herself that made Ian pause. Her eyes were serious, her expression focused as she approached. "Mr. Caldwell," Maya began, her voice soft yet steady. "I need to speak with you." Ian straightened in his chair, surprised. He had never seen her so direct. "What is it, Maya?" he asked, his voice tired but curious. Maya hesitated for a moment, as though weighing her words carefully. "I think you need to know something about your wife." The words hit him like a cold wind. His heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" He wasn't sure he wanted to hear it. Maya stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I've been working here for a long time, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice lowering. "And I've seen things. Things that I can't ignore any longer." Ian leaned forward, his heart racing. "What have you seen, Maya? What do you know?" Maya swallowed hard, as if gathering her strength. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small vial she had found in the kitchen, the one that had been hidden behind the sugar jar. She placed it gently on the desk in front of him. "I found this, Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly. "I don't know what it is, but it's not meant to be in the kitchen." Ian stared at the vial, a sinking feeling in his chest. His mind raced as he picked it up, turning it over in his hand. The liquid inside was clear, almost innocent looking, but something about it felt wrong. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya met his gaze, her eyes filled with an unspoken understanding. "I think it's what's been making you sick, Mr. Caldwell." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. His hands trembled as he set the vial down. "You think my wife?" Maya nodded, her expression somber. "I don't know for sure, but I've seen her use a similar liquid before. I believe it's been in the meals she's been preparing for you." Ian felt a wave of nausea wash over him. Could it be true? Could Isabella, his wife, the woman he had trusted, be poisoning him? The thought was too much to process. He had always trusted her, believed in their marriage, in her love for him. The idea that she might want him dead, slowly, so that she could inherit everything, was unthinkable. Maya took a step back, her face filled with concern. "I know I'm just a maid, and you might not want to believe me, but I couldn't stand by and watch this happen anymore. I had to tell you." Ian stood up abruptly, his mind spinning. He had to confront Isabella. He couldn't let this continue. But there was one problem: how could he confront her without solid proof? The vial, though suspicious, wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed to know the truth. Ian turned to Maya, his eyes narrowing with determination. "I'll need your help," he said, his voice firm. "We need to get to the bottom of this." Maya nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I'll do whatever I can, Mr. Caldwell." Together, they left the study and moved through the mansion's vast hallways. Maya led the way, and Ian followed, his heart heavy with the burden of the truth he was about to uncover. As they approached the kitchen, Ian's thoughts raced. What would he say to Isabella? How would he expose her betrayal? And what would it mean for his family, for his life, if the worst was true? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for certain: this had to end. It was no longer just a matter of illness, it was a matter of survival. And he wasn't going to let his wife get away with it. Ian Caldwell could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he walked alongside Maya down the grand hallway of the mansion. The weight of what was about to happen hung over him like a dark cloud. They were moving toward the kitchen, toward a confrontation that would change everything. Maya, the young black maid, had just revealed something that shook Ian to his core: the possibility that his wife, Isabella, had been poisoning him, slowly, for weeks. With every step Ian took, he could hear the sound of his own breath, shallow and quick. He had no plan, no idea what to say. How could he confront Isabella with so little evidence? How could he expose her betrayal without causing a scene? Maya stopped at the kitchen door, her hand resting on the handle. She turned to Ian, her eyes filled with determination. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, but Ian could see the fear in her eyes. She knew this was risky. She knew it was dangerous. But she also knew that they couldn't back down. He nodded, his jaw clenched. "I have to. This has gone on long enough." The door creaked open, and they stepped inside. The kitchen was quiet, the only sound coming from the hum of the refrigerator. Isabella was standing by the counter, her back to them as she prepared the evening's meal. She didn't seem to notice their entrance, her focus entirely on the task at hand. Ian's pulse quickened. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. He knew that this moment would define everything. He cleared his throat, his voice shaking slightly as he called out to her. "Isabella." She turned, her expression unreadable, but there was something in her eyes that Ian couldn't quite place: an icy calm. That made his stomach twist. "What is it, Ethan?" she asked, her voice as smooth as ever, but there was a hint of something hidden beneath. Ian took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you. Right now." Isabella raised an eyebrow, her gaze flicking to Maya, who was standing silently by the door. Maya didn't speak, but the tension between the two women was palpable. Ian could feel the weight of Maya's presence, the unspoken truth that hung in the air. "What is this about?" Isabella asked, her voice now more guarded. Ian stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I know what you've been doing," he said, his voice low but steady. Isabella's face froze for a moment, but then she quickly masked it with a cold smile. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I've been getting sick after every meal you've prepared," Ian continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "And now Maya has shown me something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the vial that Maya had found, placing it on the counter in front of Isabella. The clear liquid inside shimmered in the light. Isabella's eyes flickered down to it for a moment before quickly meeting Ian's gaze. Her smile never wavered. "What is that supposed to mean?" she asked, her tone becoming icy. Ian's stomach churned. "Maya found this in the kitchen. It's been hidden behind the sugar jar. I know you've been using it in my food." Isabella's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent. The room felt like it was closing in on Ian, the walls pressing in as the reality of the situation sank in. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "Why are you doing this?" Isabella took a step closer, her smile fading. "You've been weak, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but venomous. "You've been failing, and I had to take matters into my own hands." "Do you think I wanted to do this?" "No. But you left me no choice." Ian felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about? What did I do to deserve this?" Isabella's eyes flickered with a strange mixture of bitterness and determination. "You've been distant, Ethan. You've been so focused on your empire, on your work, that you forgot about me. You forgot about us. You left me alone. And I couldn't stand it anymore." Ian's heart sank. This wasn't about food. This was about something deeper, something that Ian had missed all along. "You thought poisoning me was the answer?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella's smile returned, but it was colder, more dangerous now. "I did what I had to do," she said, her voice cold and calculated. "I've been waiting for years. And now, I will have what's mine." Ian's world tilted, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. His own wife had betrayed him, not just once, but for weeks. She had planned to slowly destroy him, to take everything he had worked for. And all for the sake of power. Maya stood in the background, her expression one of silent resolve. She had brought the truth to light, but she knew the battle wasn't over. There was still so much to uncover, and Ian's journey was far from finished. But now, he had the knowledge he needed. He knew who his enemy was. And he would stop her before it was too late. Ian Caldwell could hardly process the words that had just come out of his wife's mouth. The confession, the coldness in her eyes, the realization that the woman he had trusted with his life had been trying to destroy him for months, everything hit him like a freight train. His mind reeled, and for a moment, the room seemed to close in around him. Isabella's calm demeanor was maddening, like she had no remorse, no guilt for what she had done. She had planned this. She had been poisoning him, and for what? Power? Revenge? Control? The clarity of it all shook him to his core. "You don't get it, Ethan," Isabella said, her voice colder now. "You've been so consumed by your work, so focused on your empire, that you didn't even notice me slipping away. I didn't want to do this. I really didn't. But you left me no choice." Ian's stomach churned. He could feel the weight of the truth crashing down on him, but there was no turning back now. He had to do something. The room felt suffocating, and he could feel his body reacting to the stress. He needed to confront her, to stop this madness. "Why, Isabella?" he asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. "Why poison me? You know I love you. We have a life together. I never wanted to neglect you." Isabella's eyes flashed with a cold bitterness. "You didn't love me, Ethan. You loved your work, your business, your success. You became distant. I was just another part of your life. But I couldn't just sit back and watch you destroy everything we had, so I took control. I had to take control. The only way I could get your attention was to make you realize that you needed me." Ian could barely stand to listen. The weight of her words sank into him, but a new determination began to build. He couldn't let her get away with this. He wasn't just going to sit back and let her destroy him. He had to fight back. "You've done enough damage, Isabella," he said, his voice now firm, his resolve hardening. "It's over. You're done." Isabella's cold smile widened, and for a brief moment, Ian saw a flash of something darker in her eyes. "You think you can stop me now?" she asked, her tone mocking. "You think you can expose me, Ethan? You really don't understand what you're up against." Ian took a deep breath, his mind racing. The truth was out now, and there was no turning back. He had to act fast. He couldn't let her manipulate him any longer. "I'm done with this," Ian said, stepping away from the counter, his fists clenched at his sides. "I'm calling the authorities. You're going to pay for what you've done." Isabella laughed, a sound that made Ian's blood run cold. "Call them, Ethan. Do you really think they'll believe you? A sick, paranoid man trying to frame his perfect wife? You have nothing to back up your claims. Who do you think they're going to believe?" Ian's heart sank. She was right. He didn't have enough evidence. The vial, the strange liquid, it wasn't enough to bring her down. And the truth? It sounded unbelievable. She had been poisoning him slowly, but without concrete proof, he would be the one seen as unstable, as the one losing his mind. "I'll make them believe me," Ian said, his voice hardening. "I'll make sure you face the consequences for what you've done." Isabella stepped forward, her face now inches from his. "You're a fool, Ethan. Do you really think you can take me down? I've been playing this game long before you even realized there was one." The venom in her words made Ian's stomach twist. He knew she was dangerous, but he hadn't fully understood the extent of her manipulation until now. She wasn't just trying to take his wealth or his business. She was playing a long game, a twisted game of control, and she was willing to go to any lengths to get what she wanted. Ian's thoughts raced as he took a step back, his mind working furiously. He had to find a way to expose her, to bring her to justice, but time was running out. Isabella wasn't going to give up easily. She had been playing this game for far too long. But Ian was determined. He couldn't let her win. He had to find a way to stop her before it was too late. "You won't get away with this," Ian said, his voice steady now, his resolve hardening. "I'll make sure of it." Isabella's laugh echoed in his ears as she turned and walked toward the door. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "But I'm not worried, Ethan. You'll never be able to prove anything. You'll never be able to take me down." As she exited the room, Ian stood there, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ian Caldwell stood alone in the study, his mind racing as he processed everything that had happened. His confrontation with Isabella had not gone as he expected. She had dismissed his accusations, mocked his attempts to take control, and warned him that he would never win. But he couldn't let that be the end of it. He couldn't let her get away with everything she had done. He had to find a way to prove the truth, to expose her manipulation. Ian's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone vibrating on the desk. He picked it up, glancing at the screen. It was a message from Maya, the maid. She had been the one to bring the vial to his attention, the one who had shown him the first signs of what Isabella had been doing. He opened the message. "Mr. Caldwell, I think I've found something else. It's urgent. Please meet me in the garden." Ian felt a surge of hope. Maya was his only ally in this, and if she had found something else, it could be the break he needed. He grabbed his coat and rushed out of the study, heading toward the garden. The cold evening air hit him as he stepped outside, and he quickly made his way down the path that led to the secluded area of the estate where Maya was waiting. When he reached her, he found her standing near the stone bench, her face tense with worry. "What did you find?" Ian asked, his voice urgent. Maya glanced around to make sure no one was nearby before speaking. "I think I've discovered how Isabella has been getting away with it," she said quietly. "I've been going through some of the household's older files, and I found something strange. It's a list of ingredients and suppliers. Some of the names don't match the usual suppliers we've been using." Ian's heart skipped a beat. Could this be it? Could Maya have found the key to exposing Isabella's plan? What kind of suppliers? Ian asked, leaning in closer. Maya took a deep breath before continuing. They're not just food suppliers. Some of them deal with chemicals. Poisonous substances. I think Isabella has been using them to alter the food in subtle ways, to make sure the effects aren't immediately noticeable. Ian felt a chill run down his spine. This was it. This was the proof he needed. Isabella had been using chemicals to poison him slowly, masking the effects through the food she prepared. He felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could she have done this? How could he have been so blind? We need to take this to the authorities, Ian said, his voice firm. Maya shook her head, her expression worried. We can't. If we go to the authorities now without enough evidence, they'll just think you're paranoid. We need to gather more proof, something undeniable. Ian knew she was right. As much as he wanted to confront Isabella immediately, he couldn't afford to make a mistake. He needed to be sure. What do we do next? Ian asked, his voice steady now. Maya thought for a moment before replying. I think I can get my hands on more of the chemical supplies. If we can prove that Isabella has been using them to poison you, we'll have the evidence we need. Ian nodded. It was risky, but it was their only option. How soon can you get the supplies? He asked. Maya glanced around again, making sure no one was listening. I can go tomorrow morning. But we'll need to move quickly. If Isabella gets wind of this, she'll do everything she can to cover her tracks. Ian felt a surge of determination. He couldn't let her get away with this any longer. We'll make sure she doesn't get away with it, he said. I'll make sure of it. As Maya turned to leave, Ian watched her go, feeling a sense of resolve settle over him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. They were up against a woman who had manipulated him for months, someone who had already shown she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. But Ian wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let her destroy him, not without a fight. He turned and walked back toward the mansion, his mind focused on the next steps. He had to prepare for the confrontation that was coming, the final battle to expose Isabella's dark secret. And this time, he wouldn't be caught off guard. The game had changed. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore, he was fighting for justice. Ian Caldwell had spent the entire night in turmoil, his thoughts racing as he tried to piece together everything that had happened. The night had been long, but the uncertainty was even longer. Maya had set out early the next morning to gather the supplies they needed to prove Isabella's betrayal, but Ian knew that the clock was ticking. Every moment that passed, Isabella had the opportunity to cover her tracks, to destroy any evidence before it could be found. He couldn't allow that to happen. He had to act quickly. As the hours dragged on, Ian's resolve only strengthened. He had been living in a world of deception for far too long, and now, finally, he had the opportunity to expose the truth. The reality of what Isabella had done was still sinking in. The thought that the woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted for so many years, had been plotting his downfall all along, was almost too much to bear. But Ian wasn't a man to back down. He had built his empire from the ground up, and now he was determined to protect what was his, no matter the cost. He couldn't let her win. It wasn't just about the money or the power, it was about his life, his future, and the future of everything he had worked for. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a soft knock on the door. He turned and saw Maya standing there, her face filled with both relief and anxiety. I've got what we need, she said quietly, holding up a small bag filled with what appeared to be chemicals. Ian's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the proof they had been waiting for. Are you sure about this? Ian asked, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Maya nodded, her expression determined. I'm sure. This is the same supplier she's been using. I found the records, and I traced it all back. These chemicals are exactly what she's been using in your food. Ian took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. Good. Now we need to make sure this gets to the authorities. We need to expose her for what she's done. Maya hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. There's just one problem, she said. Isabella is powerful. She has connections. If we go to the authorities now, she could twist everything, make it look like you're the one who's paranoid, the one who's losing his mind. Ian's mind raced. Maya was right. He couldn't just hand over the evidence without more. He needed a solid plan, a way to ensure that Isabella wouldn't get away with this. Then we'll have to gather more evidence, Ian said, his voice cold with determination. We need more than just this. We need to prove that she has been using these chemicals to poison me, and we need to do it in a way that she can't deny. Maya nodded, understanding what he was suggesting. I'll go back to the supplier, she said. I'll get more information. If we can prove the chemical is in the food, we'll have everything we need. Ian felt a surge of hope. This was their chance. They could stop Isabella once and for all. But time was running out. He couldn't afford to waste any more of it. Go, Ian said, his voice firm. We can't let her get away with this. We need to act quickly. Maya left, and Ian was left alone in the study, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. He knew that this wouldn't be easy. He knew that Isabella wouldn't go down without a fight. But he was ready. He had to be. The next few days were critical. If they could get the proof they needed, they could expose Isabella's dark secret for good. But if they failed, Isabella would do everything in her power to destroy Ian, to take everything from him. The stakes had never been higher. As Ian paced back and forth in his study, the door opened again, and Maya stepped inside. She was holding a set of documents, her face pale with concern. I've got the records, she said. It's all here. The supplier has been sending the chemicals directly to Isabella, and she's been ordering more and more of them. She's been using them in the meals for months. Ian felt a wave of relief wash over him. This was it. They had what they needed. But the reality of the situation was still heavy. He wasn't safe yet. They had to act quickly, and they had to make sure that everything was in place before they made their move. This is the moment, Ian said, his voice filled with determination. We have to go to the authorities now. We can't wait any longer. Maya nodded, her eyes filled with resolve. I'll get everything ready. We'll take this to them. Ian took a deep breath, steadying himself. It was time to take the fight to Isabella. The game was finally about to end, and Ian was determined to win. As they made their way to the door, Ian knew that the next steps would determine everything. He had to be smart, strategic, and relentless. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The truth was on their side, and they couldn't let Isabella destroy everything they had worked for. It was time to take action, to expose her for the manipulative, dangerous woman she truly was. Ian Caldwell could feel his pulse racing as he walked toward the front door, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had everything he needed now, the proof, the documents, the chemical evidence that would expose Isabella for what she truly was. But as he approached the door, doubt crept into his mind. What if this wasn't enough? What if the authorities wouldn't believe him? The fear of losing everything, the empire he had built, his reputation, and even his life, was too much to bear. He stopped for a moment, glancing over at Maya, who was standing beside him, her face set with determination. She had been his ally throughout this whole ordeal, the only one who had shown him the truth when no one else would. Are you ready? Maya asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Ian took a deep breath and nodded. We have to be. There's no turning back now. The door opened, and they stepped into the chilly morning air, heading toward the car that would take them to the authorities. The drive felt longer than it actually was, the minutes stretching out as Ian's mind raced through the details of the plan. They had to be careful. If they exposed Isabella now, without the right support, she could twist the story in her favor. The entire family might turn on him, accusing him of being paranoid or unstable. He had to make sure the evidence was undeniable, that no one could refute it. When they arrived at the local police station, Maya and Ian exchanged a brief look. There was no turning back. They were already on the edge, ready to expose the truth. Maya led the way as they walked through the doors, and Ian followed closely behind. The tension was palpable as they approached the front desk. The officer behind the counter looked up and then immediately noticed the seriousness in their faces. "How can I help you?" he asked, his voice low. Ian's throat tightened, but he managed to speak. "We need to speak with someone about a serious matter. It's about a potential crime." The officer nodded and motioned for them to follow him down the hallway to a small, dimly lit interrogation room. Ian's heart pounded in his chest as they sat down at the table. Maya placed the files and documents on the table, sliding them across to the officer. "We have evidence," Maya said quietly. "Evidence of a crime that's been committed over the past few months. A poisoning." The officer raised an eyebrow but said nothing, his eyes scanning the papers. "Who is the victim?" he asked, glancing up from the files. "Ethan Caldwell," Ian replied, his voice steady despite the nerves that were twisting inside him. "My wife has been poisoning me, slowly, using chemicals in the meals she's been preparing." The officer's expression softened, but he remained silent, continuing to look through the documents. "We have the proof," Maya added. "Here are the records of the suppliers, the chemicals she has been using, and the vials she's been hiding." The officer took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, looking at them both with skepticism. "This is a very serious accusation," he said. "And it's hard to believe without proper evidence. You have proof, but we need more." Ian felt the weight of the words. He knew that Maya was right, they couldn't just bring this to the authorities without solid proof. But now, it seemed that even what they had wasn't enough. His frustration grew, but he kept his composure. "We can get more," he said, his voice growing firm. "We have enough to prove she's been poisoning me, and we'll bring in the medical records if we have to." The officer nodded slowly, still processing everything. "We'll need to take this to the lab for testing," he said. "But this is still a lot to take in." Ian and Maya waited in silence as the officer took a few more minutes to look through the files. Finally, he stood up and walked to the door. "I'll make a few calls," he said. "We'll start an investigation." As they left the police station, Ian felt a mixture of relief and fear. They had done what they needed to do. The authorities were now involved, and the investigation was underway. But Isabella wouldn't give up easily. Ian knew that she would fight back, that she would do whatever it took to protect herself and her secrets. But for the first time in months, Ian felt a sense of hope. The truth was finally out. It was no longer just a battle between him and his wife, it was a battle for justice. The game had changed, and Ian was no longer the one who was being manipulated. The fight was now in his hands, and he wasn't about to let Isabella win. Ian Caldwell sat in his office, his hands resting on the cold surface of his desk, staring blankly at the files that lay before him. It had been a long few days since he had taken the evidence to the authorities. The police had started their investigation, but the process felt agonizingly slow. Every moment that passed, every second of uncertainty, felt like a weight on his chest. He had done everything he could, everything that was within his power, but now the outcome was out of his hands. The waiting was the hardest part. He had never been one to sit idle. Throughout his life, Ian had always been in control, always active, always moving forward. But now, he felt powerless. His empire, his wealth, everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in, was at risk, and all he could do was wait for the system to work its magic. Maya had kept him updated on the progress, but there had been no major developments. They had sent the chemical samples to the lab for testing, but results took time. Meanwhile, Isabella remained quiet. It was unsettling. She was no longer making her usual demands or playing the role of the dutiful wife. Instead, she had retreated into herself, and Ian couldn't help but wonder if she was already planning her next move. The thought unsettled him, but he knew he had to remain calm. He couldn't let his guard down, not now. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Maya entered the room, her expression serious. "I just spoke with the detective," she said quietly. "We've got the results." Ian stood up immediately, his heart pounding. And, he asked, his voice thick with anticipation. Maya handed him a folder, and Ian's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The lab results were in, and they confirmed what he had feared. The chemicals in the vials were toxic, designed to cause gradual illness. The poison was effective but slow-acting, enough to make someone feel sick without raising immediate suspicion. The truth was undeniable now. Isabella had been poisoning him, just as Maya had suspected. But the question remained, why? What was her endgame? Ian stared at the documents in front of him, his mind racing. He thought back to their life together, to the years they had spent building a family, a future. But the more he thought about it, the more the pieces began to fall into place. Isabella had always wanted more. She had always wanted control, wanted to be at the top, to have everything. But Ian had never been enough. Her love had always been conditional, always dependent on his success and his attention. He had been so caught up in his work that he had missed the signs. Isabella had never been satisfied. Her ambition had consumed her, and now it had led her down a path of manipulation and deceit. Ian's fists clenched as he read through the documents again. He couldn't let her get away with this. He had to make sure she faced the consequences of her actions. But there was still one more obstacle to overcome. Even though the lab results were clear, Ian knew that bringing Isabella to justice wouldn't be easy. She had resources, connections, and a history of getting away with things. The police might have the evidence, but Isabella was a master at covering her tracks, and she would fight back. Ian couldn't do this alone. He needed Maya more than ever. She had been the one to help him uncover the truth, the one who had been by his side throughout the investigation. He turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "We need to make sure this goes all the way," he said, his voice steady. "We can't let her manipulate the system. We have to expose everything, every lie, every secret." Maya nodded, her resolve matching his. "We will. We'll make sure she can't escape this." Ian felt a spark of hope ignite within him. They weren't done yet. This fight wasn't over. The truth had come to light, but now they had to make sure it was heard. The police had the evidence, but it was up to Ian and Maya to ensure that Isabella couldn't twist the story, that she couldn't weasel her way out of this. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about justice. And Ian was ready to take the fight to Isabella, no matter the cost. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to fight for everything he had, for the life he had worked so hard to build. As he sat back down at his desk, the weight of the situation pressed on him once again, but he didn't falter. He had a plan, and he wasn't going to let Isabella get away with what she had done. The truth was on his side, and this time, he wasn't going to let it slip away. Ian Caldwell paced back and forth in his office, his mind consumed with the gravity of the situation. The evidence was clear. The truth was finally within his grasp. Maya had worked tirelessly alongside him, digging through records, gathering the evidence needed to expose Isabella for the manipulative and dangerous woman she truly was. Yet, as Ian thought about the next steps, doubt crept in. Isabella was no ordinary woman. She had been playing a long game, manipulating everyone around her with cold precision. Even now, with the truth laid bare, Ian couldn't help but wonder if she would find a way to slip through their fingers. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Maya entered, her expression both focused and weary. "I spoke with the detective again," she said quietly, her voice steady. "They're moving forward with the investigation. We've got a solid case now. But Isabella, she's already started covering her tracks." Ian's heart sank. He knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. Isabella had always been careful, always calculating. But Ian wasn't about to let her get away with it. "What do you mean?" Ian asked, his voice tinged with urgency. Maya stepped closer, handing him a folder filled with more documents. "The chemical supplier, the one who's been sending her the substances, has already received threats. They're backing off, trying to cover their own tracks. Isabella's already making calls to neutralize the situation." Ian's grip tightened around the folder. He knew Isabella would be relentless, and now she was using every resource she had to erase the evidence. "We can't let her do this," Ian said firmly. "We've come too far to let her escape." Maya nodded, her expression resolute. "We'll make sure she doesn't. But we need to act quickly. If we give her more time, she'll destroy everything." Ian thought for a moment, his mind working through their options. They couldn't just sit back and let Isabella win. She had been poisoning him for months, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. "I want to go public," Ian said, his voice steady and firm. "We can't keep this in the shadows any longer. We need to make sure the world knows what she's done." Maya looked at him, surprised by his decision. "Are you sure? If we go public now, Isabella will do everything she can to ruin your reputation. She'll twist the narrative. She'll have the media on her side." Ian's gaze hardened. "I've already lost everything. My health, my trust in the people closest to me. But I won't let her destroy me any further. We'll expose her for who she really is, and the world will know the truth." Maya nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the decision. "We'll need a plan. We can't just drop this on the media without proof, or they'll tear us apart." Ian leaned forward, his mind racing through the possibilities. "We have the medical records, the lab results, the supplier's testimony. We have everything we need. All we need now is the right time to act." He stood up, a new sense of determination in his posture. "I'll call a press conference. We'll invite the media, but only after we've ensured the evidence is airtight. I want every piece of this exposed. I want everyone to see the real Isabella." Maya stood with him, her expression resolute. "I'll help you gather everything. We can't afford any mistakes." Ian's mind was made up. He had been pushed to his limits, and now it was time to push back. No more hiding in the shadows, no more letting Isabella control the narrative. It was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. Ian and Maya worked tirelessly, gathering the final pieces of evidence and preparing for the press conference. Ian's heart raced with each passing moment. He knew this wouldn't be easy. Isabella had power, influence, and a vast network of connections. But he had something she didn't, he had the truth. On the day of the press conference, Ian stood in front of the assembled journalists, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was packed, the air thick with anticipation. He could see the skeptical expressions on the faces of some reporters, the questioning glances from others. But he was ready. He took a deep breath and began speaking, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you all for coming today," Ian began. "I stand before you, not just as a businessman, but as a man who has been betrayed by the very person I trusted the most, my wife, Isabella Caldwell." The room fell silent as Ian continued, revealing everything, how Isabella had poisoned him, how she had manipulated their lives for her own gain, and how her actions had put his health, his future, and his empire at risk. He laid out the evidence, lab results, supplier records, and medical testimonies. There was no denying the truth now. As Ian finished his statement, he looked out at the reporters, their eyes wide with shock. He knew that this was just the beginning. Isabella would fight back. She would try to twist the story, to turn the tables in her favor. But Ian didn't care anymore. He had nothing left to lose. He had faced the truth, and now it was time for the world to see who his wife truly was. Ian Caldwell sat in the quiet of his office, his mind replaying the events of the past few days. The press conference had been a success. The truth had been exposed to the world, the evidence laid out in front of the media, the public, and the authorities. But even as the weight of the truth settled into the world, Ian couldn't help but feel the storm that was sure to come. Isabella had remained eerily silent in the days following the conference. No denials, no press statements, nothing. It was almost as if she was biding her time, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Ian knew it was coming. The phone on his desk rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. He picked it up without hesitation. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Detective Harris," the voice on the other end of the line said.
We've received your evidence, and we've begun the investigation. I wanted to update you on the progress. Ian's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment of truth was finally here. What's the latest? Ian asked, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. We've confirmed everything on our end, Detective Harris said. The chemicals in the vials, the supplier records, the medical reports, it all checks out. Isabella Caldwell is now officially under investigation. We've already contacted the suppliers, and they've corroborated your claims. She's been ordering those substances for months. Ian felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't over yet, but this was the first step in ensuring that Isabella would face justice for what she had done. What happens now? Ian asked, his grip tightening around the phone. We'll move forward with the arrest, Detective Harris replied. We've also informed the district attorney's office, and they're preparing for charges. It's going to take some time, but this is no longer just a suspicion. We have the evidence, and it's enough to bring her down. Ian let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Thank you, Detective. I appreciate the update. He hung up the phone and sat back in his chair, letting the weight of the moment settle over him. This wasn't just about bringing Isabella to justice anymore, it was about taking back control of his life. He had been living in her shadow for far too long, and now, finally, he was free. But just as Ian thought he might find a moment of peace, his phone rang again. This time, it was a call from his attorney. Mr. Caldwell, we have a problem, the voice on the other end said. Ian's stomach dropped. What kind of problem? Isabella's lawyers have filed a restraining order against you, the attorney replied. They're claiming that you're making false accusations and trying to ruin her reputation. They've also filed for a defamation lawsuit. Ian's fists clenched in frustration. He knew Isabella would fight back, but this was unexpected. She's trying to turn the tables, isn't she? Ian said, his voice cold. She's trying to make it look like I'm the one at fault. Exactly, the attorney said. But we have the evidence to back up everything you've said. We're not worried about the lawsuit. We'll fight it, and we'll win. But we need to prepare for her next move. Ian's mind raced as he tried to process the situation. He had expected Isabella to fight, but this was a new level of manipulation. She was using every tool at her disposal to discredit him, to make him look like the villain in a story she had been crafting for months. What's the next step? Ian asked, his voice sharp. We'll be filing countersuits, the attorney replied. We'll take her to court. We have the evidence, and now it's time to make sure she faces the consequences of her actions. Ian felt a surge of determination. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. He had no intention of backing down. He would make sure Isabella paid for everything she had done to him, to his life, and to their marriage. As he hung up the phone, Ian looked out the window, the weight of the battle ahead sinking in. This fight was going to be long and hard, but he wasn't going to stop. Isabella had underestimated him. She thought she could manipulate him, control him, break him. But now, she was going to learn the hard way that Ian Caldwell wasn't a man who could be easily defeated. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles, media attention, and mounting pressure. Isabella's legal team fought fiercely, but so did Ian's. The truth was undeniable, and Ian knew that the more they dug, the more her lies would be exposed. As the investigation continued, the public's view of Isabella began to shift. The once respected woman, known for her poise and charm, was now seen as a cold, calculating figure. She had tried to destroy her husband for her own gain, and now the world knew the truth. But even with all the evidence stacked against her, Isabella remained defiant. She refused to go down without a fight. The battle was far from over, but Ian knew he was on the right side of it. He had the truth, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Ian Caldwell sat at his desk, staring at the papers in front of him. The legal battle with Isabella had reached a new intensity, and every day seemed to bring a new challenge. The media, the public, and even his own family had all become part of the storm that was now swirling around him.
But despite the pressure, despite the looming threats, Ian couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of something bigger. The truth was finally out, and Isabella's attempts to fight back were only exposing her more. The accusations were no longer just rumors, they were facts, backed by concrete evidence.
Yet, Ian knew this wasn't the end.
Isabella had too many resources, too much influence, and too many people who were willing to stand by her side.
He needed to be prepared.
Maya, who had been with him from the beginning of this nightmare, had remained by his side, working tirelessly to help him navigate the complex web of legal proceedings. Together, they had uncovered the full extent of Isabella's manipulation, and now, it was time to make sure that justice would be served.
Maya walked into the room, holding
a stack of papers. Her face was focused, but there was a hint of exhaustion in her eyes. "I've got the latest from the legal team," she said, setting the papers on the desk.
"They're ready to go public with everything. The lab results, the supplier testimony, the medical records, they've all been compiled. This is the moment."
Ian nodded, his mind still processing the weight of what was about to unfold.
"It's time to put an end to this.
No more games, no more manipulation. We need to make sure she pays for what she's done." Maya looked at him carefully, her eyes filled with understanding. "We will," she said softly.
"But remember, we can't get complacent. She's not going to just give up. We need to stay one step ahead." Ian took a deep breath. Maya was right. Isabella wouldn't just back down.
But Ian was done being her pawn. He had been manipulated for far too long. Now it was time to turn the tables. He stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the sprawling estate that had once been his sanctuary. But now, it felt like a prison. He had everything: wealth, power, influence, but it all meant nothing if he couldn't trust the people closest to him. He had built an empire, but it had been built on lies. And Isabella, the woman he had trusted most, had been the one to tear it all down. The thought burned him. But it also fueled him. He would not let her win. He turned back to Maya. "We're going to the press tomorrow," he said, his voice steady. "This has gone on long enough. The world needs to know what she's done."
Maya nodded, but her expression was cautious. "Are you sure you're ready for the fallout? This will expose everything. Your name, your business, your reputation, all of it will be on the line." Ian took another deep breath. "I've lost everything already, Maya. My health, my trust, my peace of mind. But I won't lose my integrity. We've got the truth on our side. And that's all I need." The next morning, Ian stood in front of a room full of journalists. The cameras clicked, the lights flashed, and the buzz of anticipation filled the air.
He had prepared himself for this moment, but as he stepped up to the podium, he could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders.
The press conference would change everything.
He took a deep breath and began speaking, his voice steady and clear.
"Thank you all for coming today," Ian began. "I'm here to speak the truth. For months, I've been the victim of a calculated and manipulative scheme.
My wife, Isabella Caldwell, has been poisoning me."
Slowly, quietly, and intentionally. The room went silent. The journalists exchanged looks, trying to process the gravity of Ian's statement.
"I have evidence," Ian continued, "that proves she has been using toxic chemicals to slowly make me ill.
The medical records, the lab results, the supplier testimony, it all corroborates what I'm saying. This isn't speculation. This isn't a story. This is the truth."
He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in.
"I loved my wife. I trusted her. But she betrayed me.
She manipulated me, and she tried to destroy me.
But I won't let her. The truth is on my side, and it's time for it to come out."
The journalists were stunned into silence, but Ian could see the realization dawning on them. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a revelation, a betrayal on a scale no one could have imagined.
He knew that the fallout would be immediate.
The media would pounce on this story, and the world would know the truth about Isabella Caldwell. The public perception of her would shift, and she would no longer be seen as the perfect wife, the elegant socialite. She would be exposed for what she truly was: a liar, a manipulator, and a dangerous woman. But even as he delivered the statement, Ian knew this was just the beginning. Isabella would fight back. She would try to discredit him, to turn the story against him. But Ian was ready. He wasn't afraid anymore. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The battle had just begun. Ian Caldwell sat in his office, the weight of the last few days pressing heavily on him. The press conference had gone as he had hoped. The truth about Isabella's betrayal was out in the open. The media was abuzz, the public was reacting, and the legal system was beginning its slow grind toward justice. But even as the world began to shift around him, Ian knew the battle was far from over. Isabella had always been a woman of power, influence, and cunning, and he wasn't naive enough to believe she would simply give up. He could already feel the tension building as her legal team began to mobilize, preparing for the fight of their lives. Ian had expected her to retaliate, but the viciousness of her response was something he hadn't anticipated. Her lawyers had issued a statement accusing him of slander, calling him mentally unstable, and claiming he was fabricating the entire story. It wasn't just a legal battle now, it was a war for his reputation, his future, and everything he had worked for. The pressure was immense. Maya had stayed by his side throughout the entire ordeal, supporting him and helping him navigate the legal chaos. But even she seemed to feel the weight of the fight ahead. "She's not going down without a fight, is she?" Maya said one evening as they sat in the study, reviewing more legal documents. Ian looked up, his eyes tired but resolute. "No, she's not. But I'm not backing down either." Maya nodded, her eyes filled with concern. "We have to be careful. Isabella has connections, resources. She can twist the narrative in her favor if we're not careful." Ian clenched his fists. "I know. But I won't let her destroy everything. She's already tried to ruin my life, my health, my business. I'm not going to let her walk away scot-free." The door to his office opened, and his lawyer stepped inside, looking more serious than Ian had ever seen him. "Mr. Caldwell, we need to talk," he said, his voice low. Ian stood up immediately, his heart pounding in his chest. "What's happened?" "Isabella's legal team has filed an injunction," his lawyer said. "They've requested the courts to dismiss the defamation lawsuit and to issue a gag order preventing you from discussing the case publicly. They're trying to silence you." Ian's stomach dropped. "They can't do that, can they?" "Unfortunately, they have a strong case," his lawyer replied. "They've already started discrediting your statements, questioning your credibility. They're painting you as someone who's emotionally unstable, someone who's lashing out without cause." Ian's mind raced. He had prepared for this, but hearing it made it feel real. Isabella wasn't just attacking him, she was systematically trying to erase any trace of the truth. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to fight back," his lawyer said. "We can't just let them control the narrative. We need to prove, beyond a doubt, that what you're saying is the truth. And we need to do it quickly." Maya stepped forward, her eyes filled with determination. "What if we find more evidence? If we dig deeper into Isabella's finances, her past dealings, maybe we can find something that will strengthen our case." Ian turned to Maya, a spark of hope lighting up in his chest. "Yes, that's exactly what we need. We need to show that this wasn't just about a personal vendetta, this was about her wanting to take control, to destroy me for her own gain. We'll find something that links all of this together." "I'll get started right away," Maya said, her voice steady. "But we need to be careful. Isabella has a way of covering her tracks. If we push too hard, she might bury everything." Ian nodded, his resolve growing stronger. "I'm not afraid of her anymore. Let's do whatever it takes to make sure the truth comes out." Over the next few days, Ian and Maya worked relentlessly. They pored over Isabella's financial records, her past business dealings, and even dug into her personal history. It was a painstaking process, but Ian was determined to uncover anything that might expose her true intentions. As they sifted through documents and made phone calls, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. They found evidence of questionable transactions, money trails that led to offshore accounts, and suspicious ties to several individuals who had been involved in previous scandals. Everything seemed to point to one thing: Isabella had been planning this for years. She hadn't just been trying to poison Ian, she had been systematically working to take everything from him. It was more than just about the business or the money, it was about control. And Ian now had the proof to show that she had been playing a long game, manipulating him and everyone around her. With the new evidence in hand, Ian felt a sense of power he hadn't felt in months. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was in control, and it was time to take the fight to Isabella once again. "This is it," Ian said to Maya as they reviewed the evidence together. "We have everything we need. Now, we go to the media again. We expose her once and for all." Maya looked at him, her face serious but hopeful. "Are you ready for the fallout?" she asked. Ian looked at the documents in front of him and then back at her. "I've been through enough. This time, I'm not backing down. We're going to finish this, once and for all." The battle was far from over, but Ian was no longer afraid. The truth was on his side, and it was time to make sure that Isabella couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. This time, he would make sure she faced the justice she so desperately deserved. Ian Caldwell stood in front of his mirror, adjusting his tie with hands that were surprisingly steady despite the storm of emotion swirling inside him. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of legal battles, media attention, and constant tension. Yet, here he was, about to face the culmination of everything he had fought for. He had exposed Isabella for what she truly was. Her lies, her manipulation, the poison she had slipped into his life. But it wasn't over yet. Now, it was time for the final confrontation, the moment when everything would either crumble or finally fall into place. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking his moment of reflection. It was Maya. "We're ready," she said in her calm, steady voice. "Everything's in place. The media is waiting for us, and the evidence is secured." Ian's breath caught for a moment. It felt surreal. After everything he had been through, the endless nights of doubt, the constant fear that Isabella might escape justice, he was finally at the point where the truth could no longer be hidden. "I'm on my way," Ian replied, his voice determined. "Let's end this." As he walked out the door, his mind flashed back to all the years he had spent with Isabella. The good times, the memories, the trust they had once shared. It was hard to reconcile the person he had loved with the woman who had betrayed him. But there was no time for nostalgia. There was only the truth, and that truth needed to be heard. Maya had been his ally from the start, the one person who had never wavered, never doubted him. She had given him the strength to keep going when he felt like everything was falling apart. Together, they had gathered the pieces of the puzzle, uncovered the lies, and now it was time to reveal it to the world. Ian arrived at the press conference location, the tension in the air thick with anticipation. The room was filled with reporters, cameras, and the buzz of whispers. The weight of the moment felt even heavier in the presence of the media. But Ian knew there was no turning back now. Maya stood by his side, her expression calm but resolute. "You ready?" she asked. Ian nodded, his jaw set. "Let's do this." As he stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. All eyes were on him. Ian could feel the heat of the cameras, the weight of every reporter's gaze. But he stood tall, his voice steady as he began speaking. "Thank you all for coming today. I know you've been following this story closely, and today, I'm here to tell you the truth." The reporters leaned in, their pens poised, ready for what would come next. "For the past several months, I've been living a nightmare," Ian continued. "The woman I loved, the woman I trusted with my life, has been poisoning me. Slowly, systematically, she tried to destroy me. My wife, Isabella Caldwell, used chemicals, substances that would make me sick without leaving a trace, all to take control, to destroy my empire, and to take everything that I had worked for." A collective gasp echoed through the room, but Ian kept going, his voice unwavering. "I know how unbelievable this sounds. But I have the evidence to prove it.
Lab results, financial records, witness testimonies, it's all here, laid out for you to see.
He placed the folder of documents on the podium, and the reporters began furiously scribbling notes, the gravity of his words sinking in. "I loved my wife," Ian said, his voice growing softer but still firm. "I trusted her with everything. But what she did was unforgivable. She manipulated me, she poisoned me, and she tried to take everything from me. But now the truth is out, and I won't stand by and let her destroy me or anyone else." The silence in the room was deafening.
Ian knew that the media would take this story and run with it. The public's perception of Isabella would change forever.
She would no longer be the poised, elegant woman they had once admired.
She would be exposed.
For what she was, someone willing to destroy a man for her own gain. Ian's heart pounded as he glanced at Maya, who stood by his side, her face a picture of calm. She had believed in him from the beginning, and now they were here, together, fighting for justice. "I'm not doing this for revenge," Ian said, his voice steady.
"I'm doing this because the truth needs to be known. No one should ever have to go through what I've been through. No one should ever have to live in fear of the person they love most."
He paused, looking out at the sea of reporters.
"The truth is the most powerful weapon we have. And I am using it now to take back control of my life."
As Ian finished speaking, the room erupted into questions. Reporters bombarded him with inquiries, trying to get more details, more answers.
But Ian stood his ground, knowing that this was the moment that would define everything.
The media would carry the story to the masses, and Isabella could no longer hide behind her mask of perfection. The truth was finally out, and there was no going back. As Ian left the stage, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. There was relief, yes, but also an overwhelming sense of finality. The battle was far from over. Isabella would fight back, and the legal system would take time to play out, but for the first time in months, Ian felt like he was no longer at her mercy. He had the truth on his side, and that was all that mattered.
With Maya by his side, Ian knew he could face whatever came next.
The road ahead would be tough, but he was ready. For the first time in a long while, Ian Caldwell felt like he had control of his own destiny.
Ian Caldwell sat in his office, watching the sun dip below the horizon.
It had been a few days since the press conference, and the media was still buzzing with the details of his accusations. His phone had been ringing nonstop, both with well-wishers and those trying to discredit him. But in the midst of it all, Ian felt a strange sense of calm. The truth was out, and he had done everything he could to make sure Isabella faced the consequences of her actions. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The legal battle was far from over, but the tide had started to turn in his favor. The police were moving forward with their investigation, and the media's attention was firmly fixed on Isabella. Her carefully crafted public persona was starting to crumble, piece by piece. The pressure was mounting, but Ian knew the hardest part was yet to come.
He couldn't afford to get complacent now.
He had to remain focused, to keep pushing forward until justice was served.
Maya entered the room, her face serious but determined.
She had been his rock throughout this entire ordeal, helping him navigate the complexities of the legal system and providing him with much-needed support.
"We've got news," Maya said, her voice steady.
Ian looked up, his heart beating a little faster.
"What's happened?"
Maya stepped forward, handing him a folder filled with new documents.
"The authorities are moving fast.
Isabella's lawyer tried to get her out on bail, but the judge denied the request.
They're taking this seriously now. And we've just received some more evidence that could change everything."
Ian took the folder from her, his eyes scanning the contents. It was more financial records, evidence linking Isabella to illicit dealings that went beyond just poisoning him. "This is it," Ian muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. "She's been laundering money, using offshore accounts to hide her assets."
"It's all here." Maya nodded.
"The police are already investigating her finances. We have everything we need to ensure she can't escape the law."
Ian's mind raced as he processed the information. This wasn't just about poisoning anymore.
This was bigger. Isabella's entire operation had been a web of lies, deceit, and manipulation. She had been living a double life, and now it was all coming to light.
What do we do now?
Ian asked, his voice growing firmer with each word.
Now, we make sure the investigation moves forward, Maya replied.
We stay vigilant, keep the pressure on, and make sure she has no way out. Ian nodded, his resolve hardening. He had spent too long under Isabella's control, allowing her to manipulate him and his life. Now, it was time to ensure she couldn't do the same to anyone else. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings, press coverage, and relentless questioning. The media had picked up on the financial scandal, and Isabella's name was quickly becoming synonymous with corruption and betrayal. Public opinion had shifted dramatically, and it seemed like everyone who had once admired her was now turning their backs. Yet, even as the walls closed in on her, Isabella remained quiet. She wasn't speaking to the press, and her legal team was becoming more aggressive in defending her. Ian knew she was trying to find a way to regain control, to manipulate the narrative in her favor. But he wasn't going to let her. He had the truth, and now he had the support of the law and the media. One evening, Ian sat down with his lawyer to review the latest developments.
This is it, his lawyer said, a look of determination on his face. We've got her cornered.
The new evidence we've uncovered, coupled with the financial records, is enough to put her behind bars. Ian leaned forward, his heart racing.
What's the next step?
We file the charges, his lawyer replied. We take this to court, and we make sure Isabella faces the consequences of her actions. There's no way she can weasel out of this now. Ian stood up, his body tense with anticipation. He had dreamed of this moment for months, but now that it was here, it felt even more important than he had imagined.
This wasn't just about getting revenge, it was about justice. About making sure that no one else would suffer at Isabella's hands.
Let's do it, Ian said, his voice filled with resolve. Let's make sure she pays for everything.
The following weeks were filled with legal battles and public scrutiny.
Isabella's legal team fought tooth and nail, but the evidence was too strong. The more they tried to discredit Ian, the more the truth came to light. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the day of the trial arrived.
Ian stood in the courtroom, surrounded by his legal team, as Isabella was brought in.
She had a cold, calculating expression on her face, as if she still believed she could escape the consequences of her actions.
But Ian knew better now.
The truth was undeniable, and there was no going back. As the trial proceeded, Ian watched as Isabella's carefully constructed lies began to unravel. Her own financial records, the testimony from the suppliers, the medical evidence, all of it painted a damning picture. The prosecution presented their case with precision, and it became clear that Isabella had been the mastermind behind the entire scheme. Finally, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty. Isabella was sentenced to prison for her crimes, and her assets were seized.
For Ian, the relief was overwhelming.
He had fought for so long, and now, justice had been served. But even more than that, he had reclaimed his life. He was free from the shadow that had loomed over him for so long. As Ian left the courtroom, his head held high, he knew that this chapter of his life had come to a close. He had been tested, but he had emerged stronger than ever. And with Maya by his side, Ian knew that no matter what came next, he could face it head-on. The battle was over.
And Ian had won.
Ian Caldwell walked through the courthouse hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The weight of the past few weeks had taken its toll, but today marked the end of an era. Isabella had been sentenced, her crimes laid bare for the world to see, and justice had finally been served. He could feel the relief in the air, a pressure lifting from his shoulders. Yet, even with the victory in hand, Ian knew the road to recovery wouldn't be easy. The media circus, the public fallout, and the emotional toll of everything he had endured would stay with him for a long time. As he stepped outside the courthouse, the bright sunlight hit him, almost blinding him after the dark cloud of the past months. He blinked against the brightness, taking a deep breath, feeling a sense of freedom that he hadn't experienced in what felt like forever.
The weight was gone.
Or so he thought. His phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting his moment of peace. He pulled it out, seeing Maya's name on the screen.
"Hey," he answered, his voice a little rougher than he intended. How are you holding up? Maya's voice came through the phone, calm but with a hint of relief.
I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing after everything.
You should be proud. This is a huge victory. Ian smiled, the first real smile in weeks. I'm doing okay. It feels strange, though.
Like the last few months were just a bad dream.
It's not over yet, Maya said, her tone turning serious. You've won
the battle, but there's still the aftermath.
You know people won't just let you walk away.
Isabella's supporters won't fade away so easily.
Ian sighed. I know. I'm just tired of all the noise. Tired of fighting.
You've earned the right to be tired, Maya said, but don't let this victory go unnoticed.
You've done what needed to be done. Don't let them make you feel like you didn't.
Ian stood for a moment, his gaze drifting to the street ahead of him, where reporters were beginning to gather, microphones and cameras ready. I'll keep fighting, for sure, he replied, determination creeping back into his voice.
But it's just hard to think about what comes next. What does my life look like now that all this is over? Maya's voice softened. It's okay to not have all the answers right now. Just take it one step at a time. You've already done the hardest part. Ian was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Thanks, Maya. You've been with me through all of this. I don't know what I would have done without you.
You don't have to thank me, Maya replied, I just want you to find peace.
You've been through enough.
Ian looked out at the reporters gathering around the courthouse steps, knowing the media would be relentless. The public had their eyes on him now, eager for every detail of the story. They wanted to see the fallen billionaire rise again, but Ian was uncertain about how to proceed.
Do you think I'm ready for all of this? He asked softly. I don't even know what to do with all the attention. It feels overwhelming. Maya chuckled lightly. One thing at a time, Ian. You don't have to solve everything at once. Let the dust settle. People will always have opinions, but you don't have to let that define you. Ian exhaled, feeling a sense of clarity return. You're right.
Maybe I need to stop looking at what I've lost and start focusing on what I can build. I have a chance to create a new chapter in my life, to rebuild from the ground up.
Exactly, Maya said, and this time, it's all on your terms. Ian could hear the sincerity in her voice. Thanks, Maya. I think I'm ready to start moving forward.
You've got this, she replied with confidence. Ian stood there, his mind shifting from the past to the future. He realized that Maya was right. The hardest part had been overcoming the lies, the manipulation, and the emotional trauma Isabella had put him through. But now, the real work began. It was time to rebuild not just his business, but his life. It was time to reclaim his peace, his strength, and his future. With a final glance at the courthouse, Ian took a step forward into the unknown. The path ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time in months, he felt a sense of control. He was free from the chains that had bound him, and it was time to chart his own course. The past was behind him, and the future was his to define. Ian Caldwell stood at the edge of the balcony, the city lights below stretching out like an endless sea of possibilities. It had been months since the trial, and yet the events of the past still loomed large in his mind. Isabella was gone, her manipulations exposed, and her empire of lies was crumbling. The media had moved on, but for Ian, it felt like the end of a chapter rather than a conclusion. He had survived the storm, but the damage had been deep. The healing was slow, and every step forward felt like a challenge. Yet, despite everything, Ian had come to realize that the hardest battle wasn't against Isabella, but against the part of him that felt lost without her. He had spent years building his empire, relying on Isabella to be by his side. Now that she was gone, he had to rebuild everything from the ground up, not just his business, but his life, his sense of self. He had underestimated how much she had woven herself into the fabric of his world. But Ian was done being a victim. He had fought too hard to let his future be defined by his past mistakes. What now? Ian whispered to himself, gazing out at the skyline. The answer wasn't clear, but the road ahead was his to carve. Maya had been instrumental in helping him navigate the turmoil, but even she knew that Ian needed to make his own way. "You're stronger than you think," she had told him during one of their many late-night talks, trying to reassure him that the hardest part was behind him. "You've already been through the worst. Now, it's time to take control and write your own story." Ian had taken her words to heart. It was time to stop looking back. He had the resources, the knowledge, and most importantly, the resolve to make sure this chapter of his life wasn't defined by the pain Isabella had caused him. The phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from his lawyer. "We've got the papers ready. The restructuring begins tomorrow." Ian smiled to himself. After months of legal battles and personal turmoil, his company was finally ready to move forward. He had spent the last few weeks reorganizing his assets, clearing out the influence Isabella had left behind, and setting up a new direction for the business. It was a fresh start, and he could feel the weight of his old life lifting off his shoulders. He looked at the time. It was late, but he knew he couldn't sleep yet. There was too much on his mind. The media frenzy had died down, but there was still work to be done. He had to face the aftermath of what he'd gone through and prove to himself and to everyone else that he wasn't broken. He was stronger than ever. Ian walked into his office and sat down at his desk. The new plans for the company were laid out before him, and for the first time in months, he felt a spark of excitement. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. The chaos of the past had given him perspective, and he was ready to embrace the future with renewed purpose. It was time to redefine his legacy. Over the next few weeks, Ian threw himself into the company, working alongside his trusted team to get things back on track. Maya had been right, he needed to take control, and with every decision he made, he was shaping a new chapter for himself. The road ahead wasn't easy, but Ian knew he wasn't alone. He had the support of his friends, his employees, and most importantly, the clarity that came from surviving a battle he had once thought impossible. One evening, as Ian sat in his office looking over a new investment opportunity, his phone rang. It was Maya. "You're doing great, Ian," she said when he picked up. "You've made it through the worst. The future is yours now." Ian smiled. "I'm getting there. Slowly, but surely." He paused, then added, "I still don't know exactly what comes next, but I'm not afraid anymore." Maya chuckled softly. "You don't need to have all the answers right away. Sometimes, it's enough just to move forward. And you're doing it one step at a time." Ian leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was in control of his own destiny. He wasn't defined by his past or by Isabella's betrayal. He was carving out his own path, and nothing was going to stop him. "Thank you, Maya," Ian said, his voice sincere. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You did the hard work," Maya replied. "You just needed to remember who you are." Ian hung up the phone and looked out the window again, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The road ahead might be long and unpredictable, but Ian was no longer afraid. He was ready to embrace whatever came next. His life was his to shape, and he would make sure it was a life worth living. The battle had been fierce, but the victory was his, and he would continue to move forward, no matter what. Ian Caldwell sat in his office, the weight of the last few months slowly lifting off his shoulders. The company was on the rise again, and the media storm surrounding Isabella's betrayal had started to subside. He had reclaimed control over his business, his life, and his peace of mind. The legal battles were over, and while Isabella's sentence loomed over her, Ian had begun to shift his focus to the future. But even though things were slowly returning to normal, there were still lingering questions in Ian's mind. Was he truly ready to move on? Could he trust again? The pain of betrayal was something that left scars, and no matter how much time passed, those scars would remain. He had lost a lot, his trust in others, his sense of security, and the person he thought he knew so well. But in the aftermath, he was beginning to realize that the only way forward was to face those scars head-on. The phone buzzed on his desk, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Maya.
How's the day going? Are you free to meet?
Ian read the message and felt a smile tug at the corner of his lips. Maya had been with him every step of the way, her quiet strength and unwavering support helping him navigate through the worst of it.
Sure, Ian typed back. I'll be free in an hour.
He stood up from his desk, stretching as he glanced out the window. The city was bustling, but it no longer felt like it was closing in on him. There was a sense of calm now, an inner peace that he hadn't felt in a long time. He had come through the storm, and he was finally on solid ground. When he arrived at the cafe, Maya was already seated at a table by the window, her laptop open in front of her. She looked up as he approached, her expression warm. "You look like someone who's finally catching a break," she said with a smile.
Ian sat down across from her. I am. It's strange, though. I keep waiting for the next shoe to drop.
It's hard to shake the feeling that things might still unravel.
Maya looked at him with understanding. That's the aftermath of everything you've been through. It's going to take time to adjust.
But you've made it through the worst of it.
It's okay to trust in the stability now.
Ian nodded slowly, grateful for her words.
I guess I'm just worried about what comes next. How do I move forward from here?
Maya paused for a moment, her gaze thoughtful.
Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting what happened.
It's about learning from it and finding a way to use that strength to create something better. You've already rebuilt your business, and now it's time to rebuild your personal life.
Ian took a deep breath. I think I'm ready for that. I've been so focused on surviving, on fixing what Isabella broke, that I forgot about what I really wanted. I've lost so much, but now it's time to figure out what I can gain. Maya smiled. That's the right mindset. You don't need to have all the answers today. But you've got the time and the freedom to find them.
Ian leaned back in his chair, a sense of clarity washing over him.
I've been thinking about that a lot. Lately.
I've spent so much time building my empire and trying to fix what was broken.
But I haven't stopped to ask myself what really matters. What do I want from my life moving forward?
Maya looked at him carefully.
That's something only you can answer. You've proven that you can overcome the toughest challenges. Now, you get to decide what kind of life you want to build. Ian sat in silence for a few moments, letting the weight of her words sink in.
For the first time in months, he felt like he had the space to think about the future, not just the future of his business, but his own future.
What did he really want? What would make him happy?
You know, Ian said, his voice thoughtful, I think I've been afraid to ask myself that question.
But now, I feel like I can actually answer it. I want to find peace.
I want to do things that make me feel fulfilled, not just successful. I want to rebuild the connections I lost, whether it's with old friends or new ones.
I want to start enjoying life again.
Maya smiled, her expression warm and approving. That sounds like a great place to start.
And you don't have to do it all at once. Take your time. The most important thing is that you're moving forward with a clear sense of who you are and what you want.
Ian felt a weight lift from his shoulders, as though the past few months of uncertainty had finally started to make sense. He had fought hard for his business, for his freedom, and now it was time to fight for his happiness.
Thank you, Maya, he said, his voice sincere. You've been there for me more than anyone else.
I don't think I could have done any of this without you. You're stronger than you think, she replied softly.
I just helped you remember that.
Ian smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude for the woman who had stood by him through it all.
I won't forget that.
And I'll make sure that the next chapter of my life is one worth living. As they finished their coffee and talked about the future, Ian realized that the road ahead was full of possibilities. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be more challenges to face. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to take them on. He had faced the darkness, and now, it was time to step into the light. The future was his to create, and he was determined to make it a good one. Ian Caldwell sat by the window of his office, watching the city below as the sunlight streamed through the glass. The world was moving on, but for him, everything had changed. The last few months had been a whirlwind of legal battles, media attention, and self-reflection. He had confronted betrayal, fought for justice, and emerged stronger. But now, the storm had passed, and Ian was left to rebuild not just his business, but his life. It wasn't easy. He had spent so much time focused on surviving the chaos that he had lost sight of who he was and what he wanted. But now, with the weight of Isabella's betrayal finally lifting, Ian was starting to find his way again. The company was thriving, stronger than ever, and Ian had reclaimed his position as a leader. But more than that, he had rediscovered the importance of living a life that was true to himself. Maya had been there every step of the way, a constant source of support and guidance. Her words had always been there when he needed them the most, reminding him of his own strength when he doubted it. Ian had come to realize that he owed much of his recovery to her. She had not only helped him regain control of his business but had also been the person to help him see the bigger picture. "You've come a long way," Maya had told him one evening, as they discussed the future. "But you don't have to keep carrying the past with you. It's time to start living the life you want." Ian had spent years building his empire, but he knew now that success didn't mean anything without happiness. "I'm ready to find that life," he had told her, a new resolve in his voice. "I've spent too long letting other people dictate my future." Now, sitting in his office, Ian smiled as he looked at the progress he had made. His business was thriving, and more importantly, he felt at peace. He had made the difficult decision to let go of the weight that had been holding him back for so long. The pain of the past would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. He had learned that true freedom came not from control, but from acceptance. It was a lesson he had struggled with, but now he understood it completely. The future was his to shape, and he would do so with purpose. As the days went by, Ian began to embrace new challenges. He made decisions that reflected the person he had become, someone who no longer feared failure, someone who believed in second chances. He started to take on projects that aligned with his values, focusing not just on profit, but on making a positive impact. He began to reconnect with old friends and colleagues, rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by the distractions of the past. But perhaps most importantly, Ian began to rediscover his passion. The work he once did out of necessity now became something he did out of genuine desire. He realized that the company he had built was more than just a business, it was an opportunity to leave a legacy, one that would be remembered not for the wealth it created, but for the lives it touched. One afternoon, as he walked through the office, he was approached by one of his new team members. "Mr. Caldwell, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate your leadership. It's inspiring to see someone who genuinely cares about the team and the work we do." Ian smiled, genuinely moved by the compliment. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm. "It means a lot to hear that. We're all in this together, and I want to make sure we all succeed." As he continued down the hall, Ian realized how far he had come. He was no longer the man who had been consumed by greed or fear. He was a man who had learned to value the people around him, to appreciate the moments that truly mattered. The shadows of the past were still there, but they no longer held any power over him. With each passing day, Ian felt a little lighter, a little more at peace. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but for the first time in years, he felt ready to face whatever challenges came his way. The battle with Isabella was over, but Ian's journey was just beginning. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he was in control of it. The man who had once been a prisoner of his own success was now a man who had found his freedom. And as he stood at the window, looking out at the world he had fought so hard to rebuild, Ian smiled, knowing that the best was yet to come.